Welcome, everyone. Lovely to see you again, and really excited to see many of your faces back who've been here also yesterday and the day before. It feels like we're building and growing our online community. And tonight's call will be with Thomas Hübl under the title of Listening to the Wind of Change. And we're going to be really shifting our attentions from the symptoms of climate change to look at the roots of climate change. We're going to be looking at how our disconnect from the biosphere feeds into climate change, and how our reconnection and our intimacy with each other and with the world around us can also become a healing impulse at this time. And from there, we'll look at what can I do? What can you do if we're in this constant flow of learning to opening the generosity of our hearts for real transformation and real change. And we'll be listening to Sunita Mba, who is part of the Pocket Project team, also completing her master's in World Heritage Studies, and will be at COP from Saturday. But we invited her today to present to us about the Africa Day at COP27. And over to you, Sunita.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm glad to be on again, and it's a real pleasure. So I have been part of a couple of climate conferences, and I'm quite excited actually that I would be arriving again on Saturday. And yeah, I would like also first to share a little bit about why I actually like going to these conferences. And it's not, of course, the most amazing thing to fly there, but working with communities in Cameroon and across many African countries, I have sort of been like a voice, like a translator in a way, understanding the sort of global high-level political forums and the kind of conversations that take place at COP at this policy level, and in a way transcribe that to the local communities so that the innovations that are happening in the local communities are sort of showcased in these platforms, but also that the discussions and the policies and decisions that are taken at COP are also shared with the communities in a language that they can best understand. And today was Africa Day at COP, it's still Africa Day, and the COP is known, COP27 is known to be the implementation COP, but also it is Africa's COP. So the idea in a way is that the COP 27, we would talk about the problems in Africa. And this year, unlike many other COPs that I've participated in, there is an Africa Pavilion. Africa Pavilion is a space where the representatives from the different negotiating parties and governments, but also civil society organizations across Africa meet and chat about the way forward. And this year it was mainly about loss and damage, but also about renewable energy. The director of the African Development Bank, he has shared that Africa has suffered a lot from the climate crisis, but also has suffered a lot from COVID that hit globally, and also from the Ukraine war that is currently going on. And that from the Ukraine war, mainly lots of prices of different goods and commodities have risen in markets across all African countries. And there's over 50 million people that have suffered from poverty since COVID hit. So, and together with climate change, there are lots of communities in Africa that are in a way unable and still remain quite vulnerable, even though Africa only has about 3%, only contributes about 3% of the carbon emissions across the world. And so he has shared that, and these are his words, that the developed world a long time ago promised $100 billion a year in support of climate finance for developing countries. And what we get now is a lot of talk and zero financing. It's time to pay up because Africa is suffering tremendously from the impact of climate change. And so as we feel into his words and the talks that have been going on today, which have been mainly around the theme of implementation of climate actions and Africa's responses for a just and sustainable transition. And these talks have been shared by different civil society organizations, but also different government representatives. And my colleagues who are also there currently at COP have shared that the momentum, the sort of energy that is present in the Africa Pavilion is something that has not been experienced before, that Africans are in many ways coming together to share, and they actually describe it as a Pan-Africanism. So there's, again, this feeling of the Pan-African energy in a shared way to solve the problems of the climate crisis. So in a nutshell, that's what I want to share with you today. And I hope that when I would be there on Saturday, I would bring much more life energy from COP. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sunita. And maybe you can just stay online just for a moment more for us to take a moment to presence you. And I know how proud and happy you were and you are that this COP is taking place in Africa and that it really means something to you, that it's important. And I feel this, what you just shared, that Africa only emits 3% of global carbon emissions each year is an amazing number. And I realized that I wasn't aware of the radicality of that fact. Yeah. So just letting that sink in a bit with us here. Yeah, and I wonder whether there's anything else that you would like to share with us in this moment.
Yeah, of course. And now that you ask me to sink in, I think when you take time, you presence more. And I think I would like to share the voice of the African young people. And that it has been that the current COP, there has been limited number of badges. And though it's an African COP, there are lots of young people that really want to be there, but are unable to attend because they just don't have access into the COP. And so before the COP, there have been lots of protests held by young people across Africa seeking access and seeking the UNFCCC, so the UN Framework Convention for Climate Change, to request for more badges to make COP27 more accessible to African young people. So there is a lot of expectations as to how much money would be pledged towards the vulnerable communities for loss and damage in Africa, but also there is a question if young people actually have the voice and the space to speak about these issues at COP27.
Yes, I think that is what we still needed to hear. Thank you. Yeah. And we're so glad that you will be going and we will be hearing from you from COP from Saturday onwards. Thank you so much, Sunita.
Thank you.
Yeah, and with that, let's just take a moment to arrive more fully here into the space together and allowing this piece of information or just, a bit of what Sunita shared with us. Money being pledged but not arriving. Young people wanting young people from Africa asking for a place at the table and not finding access. Africa contributing 3% of global carbon emissions. Yeah, and let's allow that to sink in and just take a moment to feel our bodies tonight. And as we walk this path together of entering more deeply each day into our exploration of what is climate change? What is the root of climate change? Who are we? What is our part to do? What do we need to let go of? What do we need to allow in more deeply? And today, let's start by resourcing ourselves. This group and this space is a resource for all of us to go more deep with our exploration, to feel more, to allow more world to land in us. And each of us also can resource ourselves by connecting to the piece of land that we are sitting on right now. Yeah, and you might start by connecting to the land below your feet, below your sit bones, and just take a moment to honor this land. Whether you're in a city or somewhere in nature today, the land under your feet is sacred. Plants and animals and humans have roamed this land through time, through hundreds of thousands, millions of years of evolution of life. Let's just take a moment to honor all those living beings who have gone before, and all those living beings who are around us now. Maybe there is a plant close by you, a tree in the street outside, a house plant in your room. Maybe there's a tree that is sacred to you. Just take a moment to honor your connection to the tree, to the plant. Yeah, and I invite us all over these days to keep coming back to the simple resourcing of embedding ourselves, connecting ourselves with sacred land, sacred plant, sacred animal, sacred life all around us. And let's also take space to allow our emotions to be here. These are intense times, and the information we are receiving yesterday from Sarah, Pueblatin from the Philippines, today from Sunita Mba from Cameroon. And just see what is alive in your body streaming, but also your emotional flavoring. And notice for a moment that you're not alone here with these emotions, that we have a shared space. And that there is a collective aspect to the grieving, the fear, the joy, the love, the fury we might feel, but also the numbness that we might feel. And let's welcome again our witnessing awareness into the space, the part of us that is noticing, witnessing, bringing awareness and presence to all that is alive in us. Yeah, and with that sacred land below our feet, sacred life around us, and our own presence firmly anchored in our witnessing, let's slowly open our eyes again and move to gallery view. Yeah, and just take a moment here on the screen to welcome each other. And if you've been here for a few days, you might notice immediately that our presence as a group is refining and deepening. Our witnessing presence is increasing here. And you might again choose one person. And just take a moment to allow your nervous system to feel them more deeply. And maybe you can feel the moment where your nervous system truly becomes aware that this other being is landing in you. That there is an intimacy of connectedness that arises between us. And who knows, maybe somebody is feeling you at the same time. And you might want to shift to another person. And notice that there is a warmth and a vulnerability to allowing each other to arise so intimately. In our awareness. Yeah, and with this, we're deepening the coherence of our group field. We're literally growing the capacity of us. And I'm thinking that Thomas might be with us now. Scott, is that the case, or is he still on his way?
He has just arrived this moment.
I knew it. Wonderful. So let's welcome you, Thomas. Thomas is coming straight from what is called the Timeless Wisdom Training.
Hello.
Hi, Thomas.
Yes, I just came from my group. Right in. Great. I hope you can hear me. Yeah, it's good. Yeah.
Great. So, yeah, Thomas, welcome. And we're so happy to have you. And I think I'll just, maybe even before I hand over to you, I would just like to introduce you actually to the people who don't know you yet, if that's okay. And would you like to stay spotlighted for that? I know that I always find it really uncomfortable to be introduced while I'm spotlighted, but
I don't mind. Either way is good.
Great. So I'll just say a few words. So just a huge thank you to you, Thomas, for taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us tonight. And for all those of you who do not know Thomas yet, Thomas is a renowned teacher, author, and international facilitator whose lifelong work integrates the deep insights of the wisdom traditions and the mystic traditions. And he combines that with the newest findings of science. And since the early 2000s, Thomas has started initiating large group processes, and in those processes really found slowly but surely the depth of collective trauma that we carry as humanity, and started working with the integration of collective trauma, first on topics like the Holocaust, the Second World War, especially between Jewish and German people, and then spreading from there to encompass more and more themes that are up in the world at this time. Yeah, and Thomas has also written a beautiful book on the healing of collective trauma, a process for integrating our intergenerational and cultural wounds. So I could say a lot more, but I'll leave it at that. And Thomas, I think we'll dive right in, if that's okay with you.
It's perfect.
Wonderful. So we've been hearing yesterday about the effects that climate change already has, or the climate crisis already has, for communities in the Philippines. Today we heard about what is happening in Africa, just briefly, where the crises of COVID, the war in Ukraine rising, making the food prices rise, and at the same time, the climate crisis of droughts in some parts of Africa and floods in others, destroying the harvests that are there, while Africa is only contributing 3% to global emissions of carbon, is a strong situation. It's strong. And yeah, I think with you, we'd just like to ask, as we look at what is occurring on the surface at the moment, what sits at the root of climate change?
Yeah, thank you, Kosha, and thank you everybody for being here, because I think what we create here is part of the remedy. It's spaces, collective spaces, where we pay attention to, relate to, also partly integrate aspects of our collective past that are creating effects in our current life. But I will come there in a moment. I wanna also highlight something that you already said now, Kosha, is we can see more and more the interdependence that sometimes sounds like a philosophical concept. Oh, we're all connected. Of course, we're all connected. But I think we are more and more also experiencing how different events in the world are actually related to each other. Not only related, they're interconnected. And how this kind of vulnerable and sometimes also resilient and fragile biosphere network is interdependent, and that everybody affects everybody, and that interdependence, I think, through situations like COVID or the war right now, wars right now, we see that effect pretty strongly. And that leads us also a bit deeper, is, nature is not just around us. When you walk through the forest, nature is not just around you. When I walk through the forest, Thomas is also nature. And sometimes we are looking at nature as if it was something that surrounds us, when in fact it's through us. But that's not always our experience. Sometimes it is our experience, but sometimes we feel a bit separate from, as if we are looking at nature. We're looking at the biosphere. And I think that's something to deeply examine. And what I mean by that is, through the work in the last 20 years on trauma, ancestral trauma and collective trauma, I learned more and more that it looks like that every one of us kind of is living in this body. But actually, when you look closer, and I have seen this in so many training programs, what the way to embody oneself more means also the way to bring conscious awareness into millions of years of living. And I think one misassumption is that on the one hand, history is our past. And I would say no, integrated history is what's having this conversation right now. Unintegrated history is our past. And that also means that embodiment means coming more and more into millions of years of life. That our body is not just 30, 50, 80 years old. Our body is millions of years old and older. And it had many genetic updates, what we call generations. But in fact, we are sitting, when we say embodiment, it looks like it's like a personal hobby to be more embodied. But it's actually much more than that. It's bringing the light of consciousness into the entire achievements of humanity. And it connects our conscious awareness to the very fabric of the biosphere itself. And because we are living in a human system where I believe, and I, through my work, have seen this over and over again, since we have been born into a hurt world, traumatized world, that has different reasons in different parts of our world, but we call many of the trauma symptoms that are collective, that's how life is. Like we normalize the systemic traumatization. We still relate to our personal traumatization maybe as a wound, but the collective traumatizations have been normalized because we grew up in it. Imagine when somebody says, you grew up in a wound, or you grew up in a scar. Growing up in post-World War Germany, growing up in the US, growing up in Congo, is growing up in a wound or in a scar. But we often don't look at it that way. For us, it seems, oh, that's how life is. That people yell at each other, that there's so much polarization, that we have the political arguments that we hear. We could easily say, that's how life is. Or we could say, no, that's not how life is. That's how life is when it's hurt. And then there is life that is how it is. That's the emergent process in our society. These are the processes in individuals, organizations, intimate relationships, and societies that are updatable. They are updating themselves. Non-emergent processes are repetitive processes. They don't update themselves. They're just happening over and over again. And I think every one of us knows when you're in a relationship or in a marriage and you have the same arguments over and over again, that's not the future. Even if the dialogue happens tomorrow again, it's repetition of the past. And I think like a big invisible elephant in the room is the unconsciousness of that very process that affects us very much. And one of the root symptoms is a sense of separation. And that sense of separation means I feel more separate within my body. I feel more separate from my own emotions. I feel separate from you sometimes, especially when I'm triggered. I feel separate from the biosphere sometimes. I might feel separate from parts in society, groups that are groups that I like and that there are groups that I dislike. And the others that are wrong, I feel separate from them because they are either scary, they are wrong, they shouldn't be there, they look at the world in the wrong way. So there's so much systemic fragmentation. And now we are trying to solve a global issue when many of us are looking through a broken window. You know, fragmentation is like a window and you throw some stones into the window, you have cracks. And I think we don't see anymore because our brain photoshopped the cracks. They don't look so sexy, so we Photoshop them. And then it seems like every one of us sees the world. Now that's how it looks like. But I don't know anymore what I don't see. I find out what I don't see through friction, difficulties, problems, strange reactions. like stuff that doesn't work in my life. And also in the climate change movement, we find out the sand that we hit, like when you drive a car into sand, and then it seems like you don't make progress. Because there's a lot of great innovation, there's a lot of great motivation. And that's fantastic in order to change habits. We can change habits through activism, but we can't change trauma through pressure. Trauma needs something else. And in a paradox way, in order to take care of the collective trauma, we actually need to slow down for a moment before we can speed up. And if we create too much pressure on trauma, it will be the thing that looks like working against. It will be the counter pressure. And so that's why, that's a big topic that we are discussing in a short time today. So we won't pay justice to the importance of the topic. But that's a little introduction that I think denormalizing systemic traumatization is one of the main awareness processes that we need, because what is post-traumatic learning? Trauma is always a fragmented, split off information bubble in the nervous system. It's postponed experience. And healing trauma is reintegrating that aspect of ourselves into the central flow of the nervous system, like the spine and the brain. So every time we integrate trauma, the perspective grows. When we don't integrate trauma, that's where we get triggered. When we integrate it, the one who is looking becomes bigger. The one who is looking becomes more mature. The one who is looking can hold more contradictions. The one that is looking can stay more related, even if there are frictions and fragmentations. So where I'm hurt, I will join fragmentation. Where I'm integrated, I will host fragmentation. That's a big difference. Either I join unconsciously the fragmentation and I become part of it, and I also start othering, especially the ones that don't get it, or I can host the fragmentation, stay clear in my values, but don't become part of the split. And so that kind of integration process we call, because every time we integrate the past, we grow, because we learn. Integration is learning. And I think that in the ice of our collective permafrost, there is a lot of ethical learning that we've never had. So in the ice of our collective wounds, there is the collective transgression that hasn't been integrated yet. And I think that's true for racism, that's true for anti-Semitism and the Holocaust, that's true for colonialism. It didn't integrate and restore many of those massive relational transgressions. And so we are lacking some ethical alignment. And the good news is because we all carry part of the remedy, relating and holding spaces and creating collective spaces. That's the remedy. That's not something one can do alone. That's something I believe that needs to be a healing movement. But that is a collective movement. And also when we did our online summits, the collective trauma summits, we reached over 350,000 people with the summit. Every year we have around 100,000 people join. So there is a lot of resonance. There's a lot of readiness. And I think the acknowledgement of collective healing spaces is growing. And I think that's part of the future of healing, is larger healing containers that build certain coherence, have the capacity of witnessing and sensing, system sensing, and honor the interdependence of the individual and the collective. That's one system, not two different things. And yeah, so maybe this is a short overview, given the time we have. But as I said, it's a very complex topic. But at the root, I think, is a hurt, and that hurt creates separation. And that separation impairs very important feedback loops. And if feedback loops don't work, the responsiveness is impaired because it doesn't inform us. The question is, why doesn't the necessity of the biosphere inform us? Like that I have a form of the world inside, in form. And I think that's what we want to explore.
Yeah, thank you, Thomas. And, I wonder, maybe next we could go to this question around fear. And because at the moment, I feel that one thing that is shifting is that there is more and more acceptance of the fact that ecosystems are beginning to lose their inner coherence. And there is more and more talk of collapse. And there are more places where collapse becomes visible. And there is more fear rising. I think in individuals, I'm hearing that the numbers of youth that are taking medication against anxiety and depression is rising around the world. So there's a fear that lies at the root of the problem, in a way, a gap and a fear that is really being reignited by what we are facing. So how can we work with the fear if we don't push it away or tell it to go away, but actually allow it, because it can feel so overwhelming?
And the fact is, we are overwhelmed already for a long time. We're just becoming aware of it now. That fear has nothing to do with the current situation. It's being triggered big time by the current situation. But that fear is a result of living a life of massive transgressions. Let's face it, like in humanity, we were slaughtering each other, we were torturing each other, we discriminated against each other. There's so many reasons why existential fear is part of the collective unconscious and the individual unconscious. And we are becoming more aware how numb we kept some of that fear. And now when the urgency of our very life base is becoming so evident, it triggers big time that fear. But it's very important that a lot of that fear is our past. That's part of the paralysis. So now we can say, oh, wait a minute, we are so scared. Or we can say, yes, we are so scared. And it's very important that we tend to that fear and not try to not have it. But to find ways how we build spaces where we don't try to deal with that fear only alone, because that aloneness is often the reason why we get stuck. That's part of the issue. That separation, and I try too long alone, is part of the stagnation. Because fear is actually a shared space. Emotions are shared spaces. Emotions are a shared space. When a child gets scared, what does it do? It runs back to the parents. And it wants to be embraced. It wants to be felt. And it wants parents to say, yes, I feel you are scared. I feel you are scared. And it's okay. That's all. But that's often not happening. But that's what we need. We need somebody to say, yes, I feel you're scared. Let's be together. And that co-regulation that also Steve Porges talks a lot about, that's such a basic but also complex process, like how we hold a space for each other and how we resource ourselves and our spaces in order to be able to digest the fear. So that's why I'm saying, what is a crisis? A crisis is when there is frozenness in life. There are areas that don't update themselves in our society. They're stuck in the past. Evolution needs to move forward. Evolution is a river, but we are holding on to the river bench, and the tension is getting bigger and bigger. And one day the whole thing collapses because it needs to restart itself. And so the crisis is when, instead of volunteering to look at this, had we looked at the Second World War past in Europe in the last 30 years, collectively, millions of people, there wouldn't be any war now. We didn't do that. So the repetition compulsion of the millions of people being slaughtered in Russia by the German army and the reverse of it later that happened, there's a lot of trauma in Europe. The whole Second World War wound is huge. If we don't look at this, it will come back. Freud said that already. The repetition compulsion will just repeat. It just takes sometimes days, weeks, months, years, decades, but it repeats itself. And so when we, that kind of fear needs to be integrated. It's only coming up because it's split off. It's unintegrated fear. And so what comes up in a crisis or a very tense situation, there's an outside reality, and that is interdependent with the inside reality. That's not separate. It's not, oh, there's climate change outside and I'm scared. No, that I'm scared is part of the climate change issue. That's not two different things. That's one landscape. That's one biosphere. Because I am also biosphere. When I'm scared, the biosphere is also a bit scared. They're not two. And so that interbeing or interdependence shows that what comes up in us is exactly what needs to be seen while that external circumstance is happening. But often we try to push that away because that seems to be the problem that blocks us from dealing with the thing. And that's the issue. Trying to have that erased, I would be so much better off in my life without all that fear. That's the classic sentence. And that's the classical misunderstanding. No, that's not true. The fact that that fear comes up in me is exactly what needs to be seen. That's not the problem. That's part of the solution. But often we try to suppress it, and then we start getting into trouble more, because then we need to numb ourselves more. We need to take medication. We need to take, I don't know, we need to get addicted to something in order to not feel that and numb it. So then we also feel less what actually needs to be, what is right action, what is right responsiveness. And I think when a lot of fear comes up, we need to strengthen the tools. We need a lot of education, collective spaces, holding spaces to be able to transmute that fear. Because if we can take that fear and integrate it, it becomes creativity. Fear integrated becomes curiosity and creativity. Unintegrated fear just seems like a block. But it's not that the fear blocks us. We block the fear. That's the right way to say. And then we feel a lot of tension in our bodies, but this tightening is actually a way to control the emotional overwhelm. So we need co-regulative spaces where we can digest fear and integrate it into creative action. So from the paralysis, we become motivated to do something. And so I think changing the narrative a bit and saying that fear is not our problem, that fear is part of the solution, but we need to find ways, skillful ways, how to deal with it. Otherwise, we are just overwhelmed. And that's not helpful. Like just drowning in the fear is not, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying skilled spaces in a titrated way to digest the fear and become again more fluid in the movement. Otherwise, I become a bit frozen, or I am frozen already. And I start feeling that. And I think giving tools how to resource ourselves individually, in our relationships, in organizations, that is a development of resilience. And that resilience is what we need very strongly right now in order to have a stable ground in ourselves. And the second thing is that I believe we still look at our bodies in a way that is just a tiny version of what our body is. But my body is the land. My body is not just standing on the land. My body is the land. And if I'm not inhabiting that land, we will fight over the outer land. When I inhabit the inner land, which means emotional integration, physical integration, ancestral integration, means I inhabit the land. And so the more mature is my inner inhabiting of the land, I will be able to be in a much more mature negotiation of the outer land and outer resources. If not, then the inner absence will show itself in the intersubjective experience, like how we deal with land or with resources. And so if trauma always comes with a sense of scarcity. Like human transgression always creates scarcity. The violation of human rights always creates a system that is based on scarcity. That's the violation. And integrating, restoring transgressions leads to abundance. Because if we heal our relational networks, life can breathe again and the self-healing mechanism is being restored. So in a way, the one way is to notice how much scarcity there is that we also project into the world, and what's the restorative work that we need to do in order to turn that scarcity, that lack of whatever it's, lack of XYZ, turns into like a flow of XYZ. And that's another way to release the fear and to turn it into creativity, social engagement, social impact, purpose development, being attuned to each other's purpose. Because not everybody, because then some people say, oh, we don't have time to take care of the trauma. Yeah, but somebody that works in climate science or in climate activism doesn't need to take care of the trauma, but the people that know how to do it should do it. It's not that one group should do it and that blocks the rest. That's not the point. It's an interdisciplinary response system, and everybody's competence is needed. It's not that there's one or the other. When I said before, in order to heal trauma, we need to slow down. Yes, the people that do that need to slow down for other people to be able to increase their impact in what they do. But it needs to be a multidisciplinary response system. And so that one doesn't contradict the other. That's also important to say. It's not a spiritual bypassing, that's what I'm saying. Yeah, maybe leave it here.
Yeah. Yeah, and we see also from the responses in the chat that there's a lot of appreciation for the precision that you bring, Thomas. Yeah, I know that, I mean, we've been speaking about fear as this place that we've or a response that we've carried with us for a very long time in an unconscious way, and now it's coming to the surface. And I think for many of us, what you spoke to, that we feel that fear is somehow in the way, and we isolate ourselves around our fear. We tend to withdraw and hide our fear. That's a very fast spread, traumatized response. While at the same time, what you were speaking about is that fear is an invitation for relation, is a call for relation, a call back into relation. And how can we really, every time we feel the fear, understand here is a call for relation. Where is the right place for co-regulation for me now? And as you spoke about the spaces of co-regulation, I wonder about spaces in nature, because we know that for many people, being in nature, even just relating to the beauty of a flower or a plant, can be a deep first place, or one of the places where regulation of the nervous system takes place. So I would love to hear more about that, and then also about how we can deepen the inter and the intra-being, both with nature, but also with human beings, and how we can use the call of fear to call us to those places to increased intimacy. And maybe, because I know we don't have so much time, so I'm bringing a lot of questions together now, but how this may become a tool for global healing.
Right. So first of all, I want to say that one thing that I didn't say before, but maybe now is the time, is also that when we suppress fear, emotions, pain, whatever potential, that always has a good reason. So what I'm not saying is that suppression, and also the collective suppression, is stupid. That collective suppression is an intelligent function of an individual or the collective psyche to reduce pain and overwhelm in order to be able to survive better or function. And we need to know that, because sometimes when the unskillful way is kind of to get those defense mechanisms out of the way, and the skillful way is to be able to make those defense mechanisms our friends. And in the moment we can turn this into conscious friends, it's not we unconsciously collaborate with it, we consciously harvest the intelligence and lead it into something new. And that is a high skill. That transformation of past defense mechanisms into growth and new structures in society, that's very important. And that's a skill. Because otherwise, we pathologize not only our own defense mechanisms. When people say, I still have that pattern, I still am dealing with that issue. And often I'm asking, why still? Yes, I'm dealing with this. That's right. But in the still, that's very important, because in the still is the whole story of humanity, is in this one word, because it says that in the traumatic moment, here in space and time, it's not good for me. When somebody gets hurt, somebody gets discriminated against, somebody gets neglected, marginalized, abused, in that moment, here in space and time, it's not good for me. And that's super important, because there's a lot of talk about presence, but we need to understand why sometimes it's much better not to be present. Why fragmentation is better than concentration. And so in the presencing work, if presencing is effortful, I know I'm working against a force that doesn't want to be here because here it's too painful, or in the past it was. And that understanding, wow, not being present is not a dysfunction, it's a function. The question is of what? And instead of working against that function by saying, I should be more present, or I should already be more developed, what does that mean? It only means that to be here is hard for me. When somebody says, I still have that pattern, what they're actually saying is, here, it's hard for me. It's nothing to do with a wish to be more developed. It says exactly the opposite. It says something about the past. Because why wouldn't I want to be where I am? Why would I, if that's an issue in my life, why am I saying it's still an issue in my life? It is an issue in my life, yes. I am struggling with it. And that's okay. That's me now. And so the dispersing dimension of trauma, like dispersing, not concentrating as presence, is the thing. That presence is not about getting somewhere, it's actually about coming here. Like seeing the parts of me or the parts of our society that are not living here. They're living somewhere. They're dispersed. And so the awareness process of the integration is depathologizing a long upheld system of fragmenting people into that's your strength and that's your weakness. And if we keep on framing it that way, we keep on pathologizing the part that seems like dysfunctional. And I think that reframing in a cultural way will help us to ground ourselves more in that we are dealing with former intelligence that was very functional and now is called symptom. But one day it was a process and it needs to be met where it's a process, which means when somebody is screaming in a cave, in the moment you hear the echo, you don't hear the one who is screaming. You hear the echo of the one who is screaming. A symptom in a person's life is the echo of the process, not the process. And if I get that, then I find ways how to train my capacity to relate and see the symptoms, but not be blinded by the symptoms, to have a tracking device to the real process. And why I'm saying this is because I think that the pathologizing and not relating to the intelligence slows the healing process down. It's not very effective. And an embodied healing process needs us to relate to those intelligences and learn how to work with them. Otherwise, they will be externalized and they come back to us as external forces that slow down our very good motivation. And so that's one thing. And the other thing is definitely we have individual resources. We have I-thou resources between two people. We have group resourcing. That's what we do here right now. And we have nature, definitely, or other things, music, arts. There are many things that are resourcing. And especially if we live in big cities, like synchronizing our body with the natural environment is a very big resource and is very important. But that's only one resource. I think there are many resources that we can activate to, including our ancestors and our ancestors' wisdom. And examining the separation between a human being and the planet. Because when many people say, yeah, we are on the planet, I think that sentence needs to be examined. The dualism between that my body is nature and that I experience myself on the planet and not as part of the planet. So my body and my being is animated planet. And individuation doesn't mean separation. Individuation means an individual that is still connected to the collective system. And so I think that's a dualism that needs to be explored, because I think there's a lot of history in that duality. Also the duality between mind, and many of us know that mind in the traumatized system is often a top-down domination system. It actually prevents us from feeling more. And then there is mind that is great for science and for tech or for philosophy. That's fantastic. But some functions of our mind actually over-control nature. And if that's happening in an individual body, there's an equivalent how we do that as societies. And another, I think, important aspect is to restore our food chain, the relationship to our food chain and to animal farming or farming in general, because I think there's a lot of karma being created every day that is so out of alignment that it creates a very strong backlash over time, because that energy accumulates in the system. So that's a whole other section, but I think it's intimately interwoven with climate change, that there's something completely out of balance. And the Tao Te Ching says it beautifully. It says, man follows earth. Earth follows the universe follows the Tao, and the Tao follows only itself. So it says man follows earth, not man makes earth follow man. So if we reverse the meridian, we create inflammation. If the water flows in the right way, there is health. And I think there are many systems where we are not stewards of nature, as it's written in the Bible, but we are becoming the domination system of nature. And that's not in alignment with the cosmic order or the divine law. And that has to create side effects. So on the one hand, we've talked about the resourcing systems, like individual resourcing is learning to develop more self-awareness, self-connection, grounding, to do our inner work, to know when to reach out for resourcing and to know when to be a resource for others. Sometimes listening for 2 minutes to somebody who is really stressed creates a beautiful co-regulation, so that the day of that person changes and your day changes, and both can feel more meaning in this moment. And to create collective spaces for collective healing, we talk about nature as a resource, arts, and so on, ancestry. And the last question was, how can you frame this again for me?
Well, maybe I'll frame it differently now, but because I heard you speak today about the scarcity that comes from the traumatized places and the abundance that comes from the restoration of the flow. And this, I feel like at this time also to understand the depth of possibility that is open to us through this work of the restoration of flow. And I guess my question to you would be, what is your vision for global healing that is as a possibility, both in terms of turning the flow back on within the human system, but also in terms of bringing abundance back to ecosystems. Can we, in following Earth, regenerate the balance and the abundance of the ecosystems around us?
Of course, because stewarding is bowing. And if humanity loses the capacity to bow, then that's what's called arrogance. And then in the arrogance, we reverse the flow. So by being able to bow, it means listening, means relating, means sensing, means like understanding, which means cognition, heart, and body in one line. That's the sense making. So when we restore the inner fragmentation that many of us carry inside, because the more, like, it makes a difference if there's 1 million humans on the planet or if there are 9 billion humans on the planet. So the world will look like more and more how our collective interior looks like. We will turn the outer world into a sculpture of our inner world. And so the more impact, the more people we are, the more that will be visible and is already visible. So we need to find, and I think this is the time, also given the technology that we're using right now, this is the time for collective healing. That's our time. This is it. And many prophecies also said that. And this is it. And I think we need to learn how to take healing, still do the one-on-one work that's needed, but create much bigger containers where we come together. And we do that work because the more we open our sensing capacities, so that cognition, that mind and body are unified, the more we listen to all of us. And as I said before, my body is the planet. I don't need to listen to the earth as if it was something else. I am the earth. That's what I'm saying. I don't need to listen to it. Even relating sometimes is already based on a sense of separation. Relating means I need to feel you over there. But that has a built-in distancing already. That is a collective trauma symptom. And the distance between my body and the planet, that it doesn't feel like natural, that I feel the earth breathing, that I feel the deep pulse of the planet. I feel the biosphere because I'm part of its data network. It's like as if a part of the supercomputer doesn't have access to the data of the supercomputer. That in itself is a symptom, but it's so normalized that we say, oh, that's how life is. But the degree of numbness and absence that creates that symptom is what we need to become aware of. And so the separation of like that individualization is often mixed with feeling separate a bit. Individuation doesn't have anything to do with separation. It has something to do with an individual, like an autonomy that an individual creates, but that doesn't mean that it's separate. It's still the biosphere. It's not, now it's in the biosphere. It still is. But I think we normalized because we grew up in a system that feels that fragmented. So we need to detox our minds, our bodies from the notion that that is normal. Just because of millions of people experiencing that way, it doesn't mean that it's normal. That normalization is a hypnosis. And so and I think in many indigenous communities, there's something stayed open in the relation to the ancestry and to the ground, because our ancestors are the root system into the planet. And that's not something new, that's very old. I'm not saying new things, I'm saying things that are around for thousands of years or longer. And so the collective healing is basically noticing those non-emergent processes that are cycling. And we are living in a time of liquefaction. And we see this, many things become more fluid. gender fluidity. There's many more fluid aspects in life. But then it highlights also the parts that are really stuck. And there's a strong tension between creating more movement and the deep holding structure, like holding as tension, holding structure in our collective systems. And the tension is strong. And so I think every one of us that creates more awareness of that frozenness and the repetitive processes in our society that are not happening now. This is not now, this is in the past. That's a stagnation, and it's kind of like a regression in an individual psyche. There's something repeating itself, and we are relating to it as if it was true now. And that's unconscious. And so revealing for all of us, like it's a teamwork for entire humanity, revealing those processes and creating a subject-object transcendence of the collective shadow, that's our work. And the more we do it, the faster it will get. So the more every one of us recognizes something like it. For example, how many nouns we use instead of verbs. We say there's tension versus there is tightening. We say there's absence, but absence is a process, it's absencing. And so many itifications in our society, like things that we call it, is actually a process. And liquefying our world is more experiencing it as a process. There's no relationship, there's relating. It's a data flow. Moment to moment to moment to moment. Kosher exists in Thomas's nervous system. Kosher intra-exists. We exist all in each other. Transgressions against human rights collapse the intra-existence of the you in the other. I cannot be intimate, feel you, and hurt you at the same time. I need to shut down that part in myself to commit the violation against human rights. And so the intra-existence, that creates intimacy. But that means that I update, when I feel you, Kosha, I update you in me moment to moment to moment again. When I stop feeling you, I relate to the past of you in me. It's like the internet transmission stops. But that frozenness is we lost the relational data transmission. And that's where we recreate pain. So in a way, the reverse is also true. That when we heal relational networks, we increase the noticing of the intra-existence, we honor that intra-existence in each other, and that's called wisdom. Wise means more of the world is included in the way I live. That's wisdom. More of the world is part of the way I live, take decisions, move, use resources, whatever. The more is shut down, the more lives outside, is externalized, othered. So wisdom, when some people say like an old soul, what they're referring to is like a lot of the world is included in that person's experience, like felt included, not just intellectually, in an embodied way. So we actually turn on the inter-existence of each other in each other. And trauma healing, like the integration of split off information, is not only healing my life, it's actually opening the world for our children to become bigger. Hurting each other is closing the world of our children and reducing the possibilities. So when we say live a responsible life, that is able to respond to the future means I'm open and I can sense the future generations as part of my movement, as I can sense the former generations as part of my movement. That's the ability to respond. It's not just a duty, it's an ability. That's why it's called responsibility. I'm able to respond. So I can live a lifestyle that includes the future generations in the way I live. Sometimes we call it sustainable, but it's an open sensing capacity. Yeah, so maybe, I don't know if that sounds too abstract, but I think it's important.
Yeah, I can feel it's important in the body. Thank you, Thomas. You know what has happened is that we've had this hour with you, and the hour is nearly over. And we would have loved to take more questions, and maybe we have space just for one short question still. Yeah, Paul, over to you. And please just keep it like 1-2 sentences if you can.
Yeah, just want to start giving thanks to the other person whose comment in chat stimulated this question. Thomas, I'm involved in grief tending, and I believe in this non-experting skills for all that you speak about. I wonder if you might give just off the top, how might fear tending explicitly look similar but different? How might it be different? How might I consider fear tending as opposed to grief tending? Because whilst I might have a deep sense that the same thing's going on, my understanding is we relate differently to these two words, and that means something in how people might engage.
That's true. That's true. I think the challenge with the fear tending is the level of, I mean, that's also true for grief tending, but I think with the fear, it's a bit more existential sometimes, is that when we touch fear, we need to do it in a way that we have, I often say, you have one leg on the island and one leg in the water. So one leg is touching the fear, but one leg has a ground. So it's grounded in some presence. It can be my body awareness. It can be my awareness of you when you sit with me. And it is something that is present in my awareness, and I can touch the past because the fear is often the past. So I can touch my past while I am grounded or anchored in something present. If I don't do that, then we sometimes drown in the overwhelm of the fear and the stress that comes with the fear, and nothing happens. We just had another bad moment, but nothing, there's no outcome. So I think the skill building is, on the one hand, that we know how to keep that titration well, so that we can onboard stress and we can onboard fear. And in that process, the person experiences like a de-escalation of stress in the system and feels more dynamic, open, and related. And sometimes we can do that with each other. We just need to know when certain people touch fear, it needs a professional support, because what opens up through it is too much for somebody that is not trained to hold. And then if it starts overloading the entire system, so then it might lead to more pain than, and that's the edge to know, okay, this is what I can do by myself. I can call a friend and share my fears with a friend, somebody I trust, or I can tell it to you. And then I for some things in myself, and that's, for this we need the skill that I'm saying, is that we don't go into the fear before we don't do other things first. So for some people, it's not the right thing to do. But that is a skill building to have a sense of that. But in general, I think I'm very much with what you said. I believe also very much in high level training for professionals and a very strong collective skill building. And I think if we get these two right, which means that we have a lovely collective skill building, then something balances itself in the system of our cultures, and the professionals will get the things to deal with that they really need to be dealing with, and the rest can be held within the societal space. And I think that's I think a great level of collective education, skill building, collective presencing. And so since fear is sometimes more existential and more connected to our very early wounding, if somebody that has a very early fragmentation, so that might not be the right thing to do. Same as meditation for some people that are resting in a global overwhelm in themselves. They can't do meditation really in this stage. They need first something else, and then they can start, doing a contemplation practice. I mean, there's so much more to say. I'm trying to keep it kind of short because these are all great questions or great topics, but they need more respect. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Paul, for speaking.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. That was a beautiful question and amazing succinctness in the response to Thomas. Thomas, so thank you for being here with us. And thank you also for, your energy that founded together with Judith Sasportas, your wife, the Pocket Project, and is also behind this whole event at the moment. So thank you for your support and your love and your care.
And you, yes, thank you. And thank you to everybody for being part of that space. I think we need this kind of collective spaces more and more.
Yeah. And I think we can really feel that this year's event is already building on last year's events, and that we're growing together, able to host more. Thank
exactly.
you.
Exactly. So we grow wiser, it seems.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody. I'm sorry, I need to go back to my group. And yes, and a wonderful time together still. Bye-bye.
Beautiful. Bye. Yeah, and with that, and gratitude for this evening, I just want to share a few announcements with you. So one thing is, we already said that we are sharing this beautiful movie, which shows our human response to the knowing about the possibility of collapse with artistry. So it's not the direct in your face look at this, but it's really an artistry with which this is shown to us in this movie. The movie is 1 hour, 44 minutes long. And on Sunday, we're very delighted that the producer and director of this movie, Emmanuel Capelin, will join us to speak of his experience in creating the movie. And also together with him, we will deepen our digestion process around the content of the movie. And also, I want to let you know that we're really excited about tomorrow, where we'll be moving to another area of the world as we continue to witness communities on the front line of the climate crisis. And tomorrow we'll witness Zimbabwe, the communities in Zimbabwe, with Linda Kabaira, and see how fear is triggered in Zimbabwe by the changing rain patterns, the drought, the lack of rainfall, or the floods that come. Yeah, so we will go deeper into that tomorrow. And just really delighted about some of these short and deep and clear points that Thomas made. My body is the land. If I don't fully inhabit my inner land, we start fighting about the outer land. Restoring transgressions creates abundance. Where I am hurt, I will join fragmentation. Where I am integrated, I can host fragmentation. We all carry part of the healing remedy. The healing movement is a collective movement. It's us. Thank you all for being here today, and we look forward to seeing you again tomorrow. Thank you.